I was in a virtual strategy meeting last week. One of the new marketing leads, super sharp, probably, I don't know, 25, starts sharing his screen. He's got this dashboard up, just a blinding sea of green metrics, and he's talking a mile a minute. We're 5xing our output, he says. We've got AI generating 20 blog posts a day, 50 social snippets. We're hitting every platform, every trending audio. We are drowning the competition in content. He was genuinely thrilled, pointing at the impressions chart, which was just shooting straight up. Then the founder, who'd been silent the whole time, she unmuted. She didn't even look at his dashboard. She just asked, "That's great, but which one of those 20 posts from yesterday does anyone remember today?" The room just went silent. The young guy, he just stared. He started to say something about brand awareness and touch points, but the air was completely out of the room. It was this perfect, really uncomfortable snapshot of the problem. He was winning the game of volume, right? But she was asking about value, he was focused on making noise, and she was looking for a signal. And that gap, between shouting the loudest and actually being heard, well, that's where the real competitive advantage is hiding. Okay, let's unpack this. That story, it just perfectly captures the core conflict, doesn't it? In our modern professional lives, our digital lives, this gap between chasing maximum velocity, more meetings, more emails, more content, and actually prioritizing, well, intentionality, quality. We're kind of trained to measure the flood, not the depth.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating, look into it, is that this isn't just like a motivational issue. It's treated as a quantifiable strategic failure. So this deep dive is really about that competitive advantage. The one found in prioritizing focused work, digital intentionality. We're going to explore two sort of interconnected worlds. First, the corporate productivity side. What are the gains from digital minimalism? We've got some hard data on how focused work impacts employee well-being, output quality. And second, we'll see how these same principles are driving actual structural changes in the digital ecosystem, challenging those engagement-driven social media models with systems built for genuine human value. It's really the strategy guide for amplifying your signal in a world that's just incredibly noisy.
Okay, let's start where the volume is arguably loudest. The modern enterprise. I mean, we demand high performance, efficiency, but that constant intensity, the always-on communication, the overflowing schedules, it actually works against organizational success, doesn't it? This research we looked at demonstrates pretty clearly that this constant churning leads to, well, decreased productivity and dramatically heightened stress. It's a vicious cycle, and no amount of cutting-edge tech seems to solve it on its own.
Right. And to understand the stakes here, we have to recognize this isn't just a management issue anymore. It's really becoming a public health crisis.
Yeah.
Back in 2022, the World Health Organization actually formally classified burnout syndrome as an occupational disease. That's huge. So now we have a clinical definition. It's a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress that hasn't been successfully managed. And it shows up as, feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from your job, feeling cynical about it, and just reduced professional efficacy. You feel like you're not doing a good job.
And when you look at the consequences, you see the direct hit to the bottom line, right? It's not just the human cost, which is significant, obviously.
Absolutely. Burnout is strongly correlated with impaired worker performance, reduced productivity across the board, increased absenteeism, and a really crippling factor, especially for knowledge industries, is high turnover rates. People just leave. The research often points to these high-pressure environments, particularly when they're compounded by task overload and maybe insufficient control over your own schedule. Those are the primary drivers. We specifically noted engineering teams seem particularly vulnerable to these effects.
Why engineering teams specifically?
Well, think about it. Their work requires immense cognitive depth, precision, but they're often subjected to the most constant interruptions. Urgent requests, context switching. It fragments that deep thinking.
So if constant intensity is the disease, what's the occupational medicine? We looked at a quasi-experimental study done at Acre Solutions, focusing precisely on an engineering team to test some really actionable solutions.
Yeah, the researchers introduced some pretty established methodologies, things intended to give employees back a sense of control and structure. For instance, they used Eisenhower's decision matrix. It's a simple tool, really, for distinguishing between urgent tasks and important tasks. Helps you prioritize high-value work over just the urgent noise that pops up. And they also implemented principles from the Getting Things Done method, or GTD.
Right, GTD. For anyone not familiar, what's the basic idea there?
The core of GTD is basically externalizing tasks. Instead of trying to keep everything in your head, like a messy filing cabinet, constantly reminding you of 50 things you need to do, you capture those tasks, you clarify what the very next action is, and you organize them outside your mind in a trusted system. This reduces what psychologists call cognitive load, that mental energy you spend just remembering and worrying about what needs doing. So the mission here was to quantify whether these specific time management interventions could actually improve both technical performance and employee well-being.
And what did the initial findings show about well-being? Did just the act of organizing time and cutting down that cognitive load actually make employees feel better?
It really did, immediately and measurably. The result indicated a distinct improvement in overall productivity indicators and a significant decrease in how employees perceive their own stress and fatigue levels. But here's the crucial part, I think. The success of these strategies was positively correlated with employee engagement levels.
That's a key insight, isn't it? It suggests that structure isn't just like a top-down management tool. It can actually be a source of engagement. So when employees feel they have more control, maybe a clearer map for navigating their intense workload, they don't just get less stressed, they actually become more invested in the work itself.
Precisely. That intentionality creates this powerful positive feedback loop. When you introduce clarity and reduce the chaos of sheer volume, people stop feeling like they're just, plugging holes in a dam. They start feeling like they're actually building something. And that leads to greater success with these new routines, makes them stick.
That clarity and structure, it's the perfect segue into deep work, right? If constant intensity is the volume, deep work feels like the signal. Let's zoom in on this concept. It seems foundational to this whole idea of intentionality.
Yeah, deep work. Cal Newport defined it back in 2016. It's essentially the ability to focus intensely on cognitively demanding tasks without interruptions. Simple concept, hard to do. It's positioned as the ultimate antidote to the superficial, volume-based churning that defines so much of our digital and professional lives. Newport argues it's maybe the single most essential skill for high performance and genuine innovation today.
Why is that continuous focus so critical? We often think we can multitask, right? But cognitive science, it tells a different story, doesn't it?
It really does. It's all about how our brains process complex information.
Yeah.
You need that continuous attention, that deep processing, to truly optimize performance. When you shift attention, even for a moment like glancing at an email notification, checking a chat message, you incur what's called a cognitive switching cost. You have to recall context, re-engage the mental machinery, fight off the urge to keep thinking about the thing that just distracted you. It takes effort and time.
So fewer attention shifts directly translate to higher quality output. It's not just about speed.
Exactly. It's maybe even more about quality than speed. When professionals can extend those periods of undistracted concentration, they increase both the efficiency and, critically, the quality of the final output. That continuous process allows for precision, detailed analysis, which is why it's really non-negotiable in fields like engineering or research or writing or strategy. And importantly, the research really reinforces that deep work isn't some magical innate talent. It's a learned skill. It has to be trained, integrated into daily practices. It demands deliberate effort.
Okay, let's get to the data from that Acre Solutions engineering team again. When they applied these principles, what were the actual measurable performance gains?
Well, the measurable outcomes were pretty compelling, especially when you look at the employee's own perception of their professional value. There was a significant leap of 21% in how employees perceived the quality and effectiveness of their work after the intervention. They didn't just feel slightly better, they felt the technical output they were delivering was substantially better than before. That's a big jump in confidence and perceived value.
Wow, a 21% jump in perceived quality. That's huge. It really shows that emotional and professional satisfaction that must come from delivering value, not just volume. But the measured gains in actual time spent focused were more modest, weren't they?
That's right. In terms of the hard data, we saw an 8% increase in employees' reported ability to maintain continuous focus. Now, 8% is still a measurable win. It's a difficult win against constant interruptions in a modern workplace, for sure. But why is that emotional jump, that 21%, so much bigger than the measured time gain? It sort of implies that the perception of control and the knowledge that you're doing high-quality work is maybe more valuable psychologically than just the raw minutes gained. That 21%, it feels like the restoration of some psychological safety and professional pride.
Okay, now here's the essential trade-off, right? The nuance that stops this from sounding like a pure magic bullet. Despite all those gains, the data also noted a slight increase in stress.
Yes. We saw a modest 2.10% increase in employees' self-perception of stress and fatigue. And this is a crucial insight. It really has to be addressed. Deep work is, by its very nature, cognitively demanding. It's hard work. Think of it like physical training, maybe. If you start lifting seriously for the first time, you're going to be sore, you'll be tired, even if the long-term results are beneficial. The effort required to enter and sustain that high level of focus, especially when you're retraining habits away from superficial work, it's intense.
So that small increase in perceived stress suggests the team was genuinely working harder, more intently, for longer periods, even if they were ultimately getting better results and feeling better about the quality. It's like the temporary strain needed for the long-term gain.
Exactly. It's the difference between, say, sprinting intensely for an hour versus just jogging lightly all day. That short, high-intensity sprint leaves you fatigued, sure, but it produces results that jogging all day never could. The key then becomes managing that intensity, pacing yourself, which leads us directly to the next piece, how we structure our time to allow for that intensity.
Right. If deep work is that high-intensity sprint, then meetings, well, they're often the roadblocks that force you to stop every 5 minutes, aren't they? Interruptions, especially structured meetings, are just notorious productivity killers because they shatter those deep work blocks. So the Acre Solutions study took this head on by looking at the corporate implementation of no meeting days, or NMDs, specifically designed as protective blocks for focused work.
Yeah, and the general research supporting NMDs is overwhelmingly positive. It links them directly to greater autonomy and, interestingly, dramatically lower stress levels.
Yeah.
But we have to address the skepticism right away, because I know what people think.
I was just going to ask, wait, a 75% stress reduction sounds fantastic, but practically, doesn't canceling all meetings for multiple days a week risk guaranteeing some kind of coordination breakdown? Aren't you just replacing the stress of too many meetings with the stress of, poor communication and things falling through the cracks?
That is the essential challenge, absolutely. And the research acknowledges it. Studies found that implementing between 1 and 5 NMDs per week correlated with significant stress reduction. The data point that really grabs attention is the sheer magnitude of the burden meetings represent. Stress levels were shown to drop by up to 75% when 5 NMDs were implemented across the week. That just shows the tremendous cognitive load that constant meeting pressure imposes on people.
Okay, so 5 NMDs virtually eliminates the stress, but probably causes other problems. What did the research suggest was the sweet spot, the balance between focus and necessary collaboration?
It looked like the optimal balance seemed to be around 3 NMDs per week. This offered the best compromise, it seems, providing 3 full days of protected blocks for individual focus, for deep work, while still allowing the remaining 2 days for necessary interaction, collaboration, maybe those high-value decision-making meetings you actually do need.
Let's look at the specific impact of this NMD intervention on that engineering team at Acre Solutions. How effective was this single change in protecting critical, complex work time?
The results were immediate and quite powerful, especially for those complex tasks. They measured the average hours dedicated to document analysis, which is high-value technical work for engineers. Before NMD, the average was 3.38 hours. After NMD was introduced, that shot up to 5.35 hours. That's a significant increase in time dedicated purely to high-value output. And this contributed to that overall 25% increase in productive time we saw when combining NMD with the other time management methods.
And what about the actual size of those uninterrupted focus blocks? Did they get longer?
They did. We saw an 11% improvement there. The longest period of uninterrupted work reported increased from 1.84 hours to 2.35 hours. And crucially, the NMD seemed to act as a buffer against that intensity stress we talked about with deep work. The NMD intervention showed a favorable decrease in the self-perception of stress and fatigue, dropping from 1.62 down to 1.30 on a scale. So it protects the employee from the surrounding chaos, allowing that deep work to happen without adding more stress.
Now, the most remarkable finding for me, maybe, is the correlation between NMD and where people preferred to work. This isn't just about time management. It seems to be about environment management, too.
Yeah, it really connects the dots between intentionality and location, doesn't it? Before the intervention, 60% of individuals preferred working in the office versus 40% remote. Pretty standard split, maybe. However, on the days NMD was implemented, the preference for remote work just skyrocketed to 80%. Only 20% preferred the office on those specific days.
Wow. That's a huge shift. It really seems like the office environment itself is psychologically linked to the chaos of meetings and interruptions for many people. So if the purpose of the day is deep work, people overwhelmingly prefer the location that minimizes the risk of interruption, which is often their home. The ability to do deep work seems fundamentally linked to the desire for remote work, at least on those focus days.
It really creates a clear mandate, I think, for how hybrid work could be structured more effectively. The office becomes a place for intentional collaboration, for those necessary meetings on meeting days. And the remote setting becomes the protected space for intentional focus on NMDs. But And this is a big but, to ensure NMDs actually succeed, you need to deliberately adopt asynchronous communication methods.
Okay, explain that. Why is asynchronous communication the key structural requirement here? What does that mean in practice?
Well, asynchronous tools. Think things like shared documents with clear commenting, structured project management software like Asana or Trello, maybe recorded video updates instead of live meetings for information sharing. They are the mechanism that protects focus while ensuring collaboration doesn't just grind to a halt. It allows a worker to engage with necessary inputs or requests on their schedule during a designated communication block, perhaps, not just whenever the sender feels like interrupting them. You protect the deep work session, you absorb the information later when you're ready, and you can provide detailed, thoughtful input. It ensures continuity without sacrificing that crucial intentionality. The whole shift to value requires intentional communication methods to back it up. You can't just declare NMD and hope for the best.
Okay, so we've established this corporate mandate, right? Success is found not in more volume, but in more intentional focus, greater agency over one's time. And if employees are demanding agency over their time in the physical office, it really begs the question, how much agency do we demand over the digital spaces where we spend so much of the rest of our lives? Let's pivot back to that opening story. The content creator just chasing impressions, drowning in volume.
Yeah, the fundamental conflict is exactly the same. The digital world, especially traditional social media, is largely engineered for volume. These platforms typically rely on centralized, top-down governance. A single code of conduct is set by the platform, often enforced by opaque algorithms we don't understand. The main optimization metric is usually time spent or engagement volume, clicks, likes, shares, comments, whatever keeps you scrolling. This inherently limits community agency, it prevents real transparency, and it often fosters an environment where controversy or outrage wins because it generates the highest volume of interaction, even if it's low quality.
It sounds like the digital equivalent of that corporate environment we were just discussing, kind of close supervision, centralized control, leading to high output maybe, but low quality interaction and probably high turnover of users seeking healthier spaces.
That's a great parallel. And in response, we're seeing these decentralized networks emerging, things like the Fediverse. Mastodon is probably the best known example that aim to fix this by offering local autonomy. They allow distinct communities, often running on different servers, to define their own codes of conduct, their own policies, their own governance structures. It's the promise of digital agency taking back control.
But these decentralized platforms, they seem to run into their own structural issue, something the materials we reviewed called the paradox of decentralization. What's that about?
The paradox is basically this. While decentralization is intended to foster independence and freedom from that central control, which is good, when isolated servers or communities define their world too narrowly, without enough connection to others, it risks deepening echo chambers. This fragmentation might increase isolation and reinforce ideological filter bubbles, potentially even heightening polarization because users have limited opportunities for constructive cross-community connection or exposure to different views. So you kind of solve the volume control problem, but potentially create a connectivity or fragmentation problem.
Okay, so if centralized models fail because they lack agency and transparency, and purely decentralized models risk isolation and fragmentation, the intentionality solution has to be something that bridges that gap, right? Something that moves the main optimization metric away from just maximizing engagement volume and towards designing for actual value.
Exactly. The necessary shift, it seems, is towards systems that actively place community governance and user agency right at the center, not as an afterthought, but as the core design principle. And the core finding here seems really strong. The research clearly showed that well-defined community purposes and explicit shared norms correlate directly with enhanced constructive interactions. This means when a digital community explicitly defines its mission, say, we're here for supportive discussion about knitting, or we're exploring astrophysics curiosities, and sets clear rules around that purpose, the quality of the discourse measurably improves compared to platforms where the norms are just vague directives like be civil or don't harass, which mean different things to everyone. Intentional design really does amplify the signal.
This brings us to a platform that actually attempts to implement this intentionality solution in practice, Odessa. It's described as a decentralized social systems app. It was designed specifically as an experimental platform, it seems, to achieve that crucial balance between local governance, letting communities run themselves, and enabling constructive cross-community connection. How is it structured to try and maximize value and agency?
Right. Odessa is built on three core design pillars, as described. The first is community-centered governance. This really empowers local communities to define their own purpose, their specific speech norms. And these norms can be prescriptive, like encourage helpful answers, or restrictive, like no unsolicited advice. They also get to define their entire governance structure, how rules are made, enforced, changed.
Okay, so that's the local autonomy part. And the second pillar, that directly addresses the fragmentation risk we just talked about.
Exactly. The second is bridging spaces. This is really the key mechanism for managing that paradox of decentralization. Odessa facilitates constructive interaction between these autonomous communities. It does this by using shared prompts for discussion and, crucially, explicitly defined bridge policies for those cross-community interactions. These are intentionally designed to prevent isolation and manage potential friction.
And then there's the third pillar, which uses some pretty sophisticated technology to ensure transparency, especially around moderation. Explainable AI assistance. Let's focus on that for a second. How does Odessa leverage these interpretable language models to make moderation feel transparent and fair rather than, arbitrary and opaque like it often does on big platforms?
So the system reframes moderation. It's not just a simple pass-fail classification like rule broken or rule not broken. It's framed as classification plus rationale extraction. This means when a potential norm violation is flagged, the AI system goes beyond just confirming the rule break. It actually identifies the minimum sequence of tokens, basically, the specific words or phrase in the comment that triggered the violation according to the community's definition. So it provides a precise, automated explanation for why something was flagged.
Okay, that's a huge shift in transparency, isn't it? So instead of just getting a message saying, you violated the no harassment rule, you might get something like, the phrase, you sound like a complete idiot, specifically triggered the no personal attacks norm in this community because of the token's complete idiot.
Exactly that. Think of the AI as more like a precision surgical tool, highlighting the specific issue, rather than just a blunt hammer coming down. This process does a few things. It dramatically increases transparency for the user. It allows communities to define and enforce their own specific speech norms with much greater granularity. And it also significantly reduces the mental and emotional load on human moderators, because the AI provides the initial flag and the clear reason, allowing the moderator to focus on the judgment and context.
But the challenge still remains, even with transparent moderation. How do you get two autonomous communities, let's say, a very supportive, gentle parenting community and a, highly competitive, trash-talking gaming community to share a bridging space effectively? They might both have a rule that says, be respectful, but that phrase means wildly different things in those two contexts, right?
Absolutely, and this is where some of the most advanced LLM work came into play in the Odessa project. They use large language models essentially as, you could think of them as digital cultural anthropologists. The LLMs analyzed hundreds, maybe thousands, of instances of historically moderated content from two different communities that, on the surface, had the same norm, like be respectful.
Right.
Based on how that rule was actually violated or enforced in practice within each separate community, the LLMs were able to generate distinct, nuanced definitions of that same norm as understood by each community.
Whoa. So the AI learned the unspoken context. It figured out that in community A, respect meant, say, always validating feelings, whereas in community B, respect meant challenging ideas directly, even bluntly, but without personal insults.
Precisely. The LLM surfaces those hidden, subtle nuances that users within a community intuitively understand but might struggle to articulate clearly, especially to outsiders. The goal of this unsupervised method is then to use those AI-generated nuanced definitions to help communities develop explicit bridging policies. These policies can then promote mutual understanding and set really clear expectations for interaction in those shared spaces. It enables cross-community connection without forcing either community to sacrifice its unique culture or autonomy. The signal, the meaning of respect in that context, is explicitly defined, not just vaguely assumed.
This whole community-centric approach, it seems fundamentally about rebuilding trust in digital spaces, doesn't it? Who did participants in the Odessa user study actually trust most to set the tone and the policies for these online spaces?
Yeah, the findings here were a really strong validation of this community-centric model, especially when compared to the traditional centralized approach of big platforms. Participants overwhelmingly agreed that the composition of the community's members, who else is in the space with you, was the single most significant factor influencing the overall tone of conversation. And when asked who should define the content norms and rules, Community members and community moderators were trusted far, far more than platform moderators employed by the company or the platform itself making top-down rules. It suggests trust is inherently local, it's decentralized, and it seems tied to that feeling of shared purpose and mutual accountability. You trust the people you share a specific goal or interest with.
And those local differences in norms, they were really fascinating in the specific anecdotes that came out of the user study. What were some of the real-world examples of norm variance participants reported? It wasn't just theoretical, right?
Oh, absolutely not. The variance was striking and very concrete. One participant reported that in their family community, the norm of respect primarily meant acts of service. You're doing things for others, achieving success that reflects well on the family, that kind of thing. Yet, in their math Olympiad community, the same person reported that respect meant almost the complete opposite, self-deprecating humor and showcasing others' skill. In that context, putting yourself down slightly was actually a way of acknowledging the immense talent of others in the group, which was seen as respectful.
That's wild. So if that person went into the math group and started talking about all the helpful things they did for their family that week, the math group might see that as arrogant or missing the point because they weren't humbling themselves before the collective genius.
That tension is exactly why these explicit breeding policies become so essential. The unspoken rules for communication were diametrically opposed across just those two groups for the same person. It really proves the absolute necessity of community-specific definitions and those explicit bridging policies for any digital platform that genuinely seeks to prioritize value and understanding over just, letting everyone shout past each other in one giant room.
And what happened in the Odessa experiment when they actually set up a shared space, a bridge community, but did it without a clear, predefined bridge policy? Did people just sort of figure it out organically?
Well, the research showed it led directly to friction, pretty much as you expect. When participants from different communities entered a shared space without an explicitly defined shared policy for interaction, they often just defaulted to their own home community's norms. This inevitably led to miscommunications, misunderstandings, and confusion. Why did they say that? That felt rude. That wasn't helpful. It really underscores that simply creating a space for different groups to talk isn't enough. You have to intentionally design and explicitly define the shared policies to manage those interactions successfully and provide a structure for resolving the inevitable conflicts that arise from different norms rubbing against each other. Intentionality has to be built right into the design from the start.
It really feels like the entire project here, whether we're talking about structuring corporate work or designing digital platforms, comes down to agency, doesn't it? Whether it's demanding agency over your time through deep work and NMDs, or demanding agency over your digital community's rules through decentralized governance. The core human desire seems to be the same, to move from feeling managed by algorithms or overloaded schedules to actively defining what value actually means.
I think if we synthesize all these findings, the data points clearly in one direction. The metrics that truly matter in the long run, things like employee well-being, the depth of technical analysis, high-quality intellectual output, constructive online discourse, they aren't achieved by just increasing volume or chasing surface-level impressions. They're achieved by prioritizing focus, by minimizing the noise of distractions and superfluous communication, and by giving people and communities more control.
The design principles really feel universal. We saw that huge 21% leap in perceived productivity quality from deep work, the dramatic stress reduction potential from no meeting days, and this fundamental shift in digital design towards systems like Odessa, which are explicitly built for community-driven value and understanding. The shift from volume to value, it doesn't feel like just a trend anymore. It feels like a strategic imperative for the future, both for businesses and for healthier online interaction.
Yeah, the path to real competitive advantage, whether corporate or digital, seems to lie entirely in intentional design. Design that respects local values and context, manages attention as the precious, finite resource it is, and actively fosters quality interactions over mere quantity or fleeting impressions.
So in both our professional lives and our digital lives, it seems like moving from drowning in that flood of content and demands to focusing fiercely on intentionality. That's the new competitive strategy. The real power is in reclaiming agency and defining what value actually means for ourselves and for our communities.